Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new Maruja album, Pain to Power. Pain to Power is the debut album from the English rock band Maruja, and I have been quite excited to hear their first full-length album for quite a while now, given just how much I've enjoyed all of their EPs up until this point, and it has made me very curious as to how that sound will translate onto a full-length project like this one. Just with how brutal and intense their usual approach to jazz rock is, it makes it the kind of thing that works as just an EP that's only about 20 minutes long. And like I said, as much as I loved all of their EPs, I was definitely curious to see how that sound would work on a much longer project. Just given that it's the kind of thing that I don't really want to listen to for that length of time, just with how loud and intense their style of music can be. And as much as that style is definitely still the main focal point of this album, I'm so glad to hear how many other styles they are incorporating into their sound, and I think that they've ended up translating their sound onto a full-length project just about as well as they possibly could have. I really appreciate how they've obviously kept the style that I love so much about all of their EPs, but they've managed to do it in a way that's not quite as brutally intense as they do obviously incorporate some other more softer styles in the mix as well. And ultimately, I think that it does just make the pacing and the structure of the album one of its strongest features, as all of the most intense moments are reasonably well spread out, despite there still being quite a lot of them throughout the whole runtime of the project. And just the very opening of the first song, Bloodsport, I think is already one of the slightly more intense moments, as it opens up with these very fast and almost horrorcore-esque sound effects, but then very quickly goes into this really strange but quite interesting rap rock verse, as vocalist Harry Wilkinson takes on a much more rap style in the vocals, which while it's not exactly the kind of thing I would have necessarily wanted or expected to hear, I think that they actually pull it off reasonably well, especially just in the way that it's so fast and intense, which really just matches the kind of vibe the song goes for. And then of course you have the addition of the very iconic, intense saxophone that I think is one of the best features of Maruja's music in general, which sounds obviously incredible on this song and just consistently one of my favorite parts of the whole album. And then Look Down on Us just kind of keeps that intense insanity going, with the saxophone having slightly less of a presence on this track, but obviously still being quite a big feature, but there being much more of a focus on the much more experimental rock side on this song, being the first of three 10-minute long tracks on the project that just take you on this very long and epic journey. And this is where it really starts to demonstrate what I was saying earlier about mixing in the much calmer moments as well, which are used so incredibly well on this one. And between all of the slightly softer moments on this song, it always does come back eventually. And I just love that feeling of knowing that every time it does go slightly calmer, it will eventually come back and give you another incredibly satisfying build-up. And because it's not the entire song this time that is quite that intense, it only does make those moments feel only even more epic and impactful. And then looking at the lyrical side of things on this track, I know a lot of people have criticized not only this track, but just the album as a whole for its lyrics, with a lot of people seeming to think that they're quite cringy or cheesy. I could not disagree more. I do kind of understand why people think that, with the lyrics just being about love and positivity, which I suppose doesn't match the album sonically as well as it maybe could. I still just don't really see why lyrics of that kind of subject matter is something to be hated that much. Saoirse, I think, is just an incredible song for showing off everything that the saxophone is capable of, just with how often the saxophone is playing pretty much solo. But then in the moments where the saxophone pretty much just continues doing what it's doing and you have the other instruments building in the background, I think is just such an incredible structure. And just a style that is not something I feel like you hear that often, and I absolutely love what they've done with it. I just absolutely love the genuinely beautiful, slow and steady progression of all the instruments. All the while you have the lyrics about embracing each other for our differences. And I think that in this particular moment, the lyrics actually do match the way the song sounds, as this one just has overall a much more epic and sentimental sound. I also love the slow reintroduction of the saxophone on this song, even though it has pretty much always been playing for most of the length of the album so far. I think that it's just an instrument that really does find an incredible balance, especially on this song when it does start to get more intense in the second half, after having just a handful of moments of having a bit more of a focus on it being more atmospheric. And then of course the ending of the song just has to be one of the most epic and euphoric moments on the whole project, and I think that that's particularly helped as well by the use of strings on this part, which just managed to give the sound so much more depth. I do really like the very suspenseful atmosphere that's created on Born to Die, as well as the vocals taking on an almost spoken word style on this song. And then from there you have the very post-rock style progression, which of course I love, just with how prominent the emphasis on the atmosphere and the texture is. And then of course I absolutely love the big epic build-up on this track, which does kind of feel like it's getting ahead of itself in some moments, but does always catch up to itself in the right moment as it just continues adding more and more layers, just making the sound feel so much more interesting as it goes. And I think that this is where I do really start to appreciate just just how incredible every instrument sounds, even if the saxophone has been the most prominent up until this point. And especially in this particular moment, just with how much went into the build-up, the climax absolutely pays off, with every instrument just playing completely at full force in every way, with the saxophone actually feeling like one of the tamest instruments on this moment, as all of the chaos and insanity is provided by pretty much everything else. I think that Break the Tension has this really cool, ominous kind of darkness to it, with the much lower pitched saxophone and just the general sense of brutality. And there is then more of the rapping style in the vocals on this track, however, I don't think it's used quite as well here. Just in the moments where there is more of a focus on the rapping, the instrumentation is much more sparse. And when it isn't there to back up the intensity of the vocals, I just don't think it really sounds quite as good. But at least the song does end well with, again, just another brutally intense climax. I think being one of the most epic moments on the album, and the build-up that goes into it also really does make it feel like it's going that way. Trenches, I feel like, does have a pretty similar vibe to Break the Tension, in the sense that it is also quite dark, although this one has more of an industrial-leaning sound, which I actually think sounds incredible. I think that overall the song has a lot less to offer, being much slower and just generally a lot less intense, but it's just a pretty cool little moment that I think still does show the band experiencing a lot of growth. I do also really like the almost kind of spiritual atmosphere on Zaytoon, being a song that is effectively just an interlude, but despite that I think it's still just a cool and interesting moment that does bring something to the table that none of the other songs really do. And then you have Reconcile, which I think really is just the perfect closer for this album, with this very epic and grand sense of finality. I absolutely love the guitar playing, with them using styles that they don't really seem to have all that much on the rest of the album, which I think if they could use them here, I think they could have used them maybe a bit more in other places, but I'm still glad that they have at least one song where they get to show off some different styles. I also do really like the lyrics on this song, not being the most revolutionary or mind-blowing poetry I've ever heard, but it still just fits the tone really well, and I think that the subject matter is obviously still nothing to be complaining about. And then just the way the overall atmosphere on this track slowly intensifies towards the end, with the climax of this song absolutely delivering, and ultimately I think very fittingly is one of the best moments on the whole project right at the end like that, and then just gives the album just about the most satisfying ending it possibly could. And I do think that ending an album like this one is quite a difficult task, just with how intense it can be, and it being very difficult to just create a moment that really just follows it up so well. But they have managed to do that, as well as just creating a project that I absolutely love, as they have managed to use the sound that became very iconic to them on their EPs into a full-length album, which is something that I'm so glad to have heard them done so well. And I'm sure that they will only further continue to experiment and expand their sound on future projects, as they really are one of the driving forces in modern jazz rock with their very unique and brutalist style. And so for that reason, this album will get a 9 out of 10 from me. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.